Tonight, lots of pushback and lots of fallout over that scathing New York Times op-ed written by a senior Trump administration official. We'll look at the reaction and discuss whether the Times should have printed it. Then day 3 of the Kavanaugh hearings, and they are still squabbling over how Republicans handled the release of documents about the Supreme Court nominee. And it's turning into a major issue now filled with threats and accusations. Also, major developments in the church abuse scandal as the Attorney General of New York issues subpoenas for every diocese in the state. We've got the very latest. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in tonight for Richard French. And we begin with the White House continuing to go on the attack over the New York Times op-ed from a senior administration official. The piece is called "I Am Part of the Resistance," and the paper posted it yesterday afternoon. The Times saying it made this rare move because publishing it anonymously was the only way to deliver what the paper labeled an important bit of information. Now here's part of the piece that's causing all the fuss. Quote, "We believe our first duty is to this country, and the president continues to act in a manner that is detrimental to the health of our republic. From the White House to executive branch departments and agencies, senior officials will privately admit their daily disbelief at the commander-in-chief's comments and actions. Most are working to insulate their operations from his whims. Given the instability many witnessed, there were early whispers within the cabinet of invoking the 25th Amendment, which would start a complex process for removing the president. But no one wanted to precipitate a constitutional crisis. So we will do what we can to steer the administration in the right direction until one way or another, it's over." President Trump wasting no time attacking that op-ed on Twitter. The president questioning whether it's treason, also tweeting, quote, "Does the so-called senior administration official really exist, or is it just the failing New York Times with another phony source? If the gutless anonymous person does indeed exist, the Times must, for national security purposes, turn him or her over to the government at once." White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders also releasing a statement. She calls the op-ed reckless, pathetic, selfish, and a new low. The statement also saying this is part of the liberal media's attempt to discredit the president. Sanders also calling for, quote, "this coward to do the right thing and resign." Lawmakers from both sides of the aisles also responding. Here's Senator Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois.
Credible story about the interior working of the White House, of the President of the United States, tells the whole story. It is credible. And those of us who've been around him in moments when he's lost it understand that you don't want to be in the room and hear what he has to say. And God forbid, be in the room when he's about to make a terrible decision that will hurt this country.
From the other side of the aisle, Senator Bob Corker is a Republican from Tennessee. He is also a frequent critic of the president. He had this to say, quote, "This is what all of us have understood to be the situation from day one. I understand this is the case, and that's why I think all of us encourage the good people around the president to stay. I thank General Mattis whenever I see him." And now lots of administration officials are denying that they wrote the thing. That includes Vice President Mike Pence, the Secretaries of State, Defense, Treasury, HUD, and Homeland Security, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and more. By the way, President Trump is reportedly keeping track of those denial statements, and aides are printing them out and delivering them to the president directly. All this comes in the wake of Bob Woodward's new book and the White House's damage control attempts over that. The book is called Fear, Trump and the White House. Comes out Tuesday, but the press has already received advance copies. We've been talking about the book for days, but I'll rehash some of the highlights. Woodward describes members of the cabinet teeing off on their boss, the president. Secretary of State James Mattis saying he has the, quote, understanding of a 5th or 6th grader. Chief of Staff John Kelly reportedly calling Trump an idiot on multiple occasions. And Secretary of State Rex Tillerson calling Trump an effing moron. This after Trump went on a tirade about Afghanistan and also questioned why we needed troops in South Korea. Woodward also describes an administrative coup and a nervous breakdown of the executive branch. Those are his words, as senior aides and cabinet secretaries try to protect the country from the president. The book also describes how former chief economic advisor Gary Cohn and former staff secretary Rob Porter would take things off the president's desk so he couldn't see them or sign them. That includes items involving national security, trade deals, and more. Lot to digest in all of this with our panel. Fortunately, we've got a good one tonight. Richard Brodsky is here. He's a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman from Westchester. He is also a professor at NYU. To his left, Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. And on the other side of the table, Bill O'Reilly. He is a conservative strategist. He's also a communications director for Mark Molinaro's gubernatorial campaign. I barely even know where to start, but Have you ever heard a warning coming from inside an active White House from an appointee or somebody close to the president like this, Bill?
Now, my first thought on this was this is one for the history books for real. This will end up in the history books on this whole era, the Trump era. I'm kind of torn on it. I mean, there's part of me that really liked the fact that somebody had the guts to do that. I prefer that they come out and do it in public.
And we'll get into that part of it in a second. I just wanted to start with what this says about the White House and this administration.
It's chaos. It's utter chaos. You have a chaotic administration, and it continues. And when you have chaos, you have things like this happening that are highly unusual. These are extraordinary times.
Yeah. Though, Bill. When Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, when Ronald Reagan at the end of his tenure was losing his faculties, staff took on roles that normally they don't take on.
I meant in that the history books will say even staff wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. You know what I mean? There was leaks from within.
We're 19 months into this administration. I mean, this has not been...
Oh, look, the fact is that Bill's absolutely right. There is chaos. There is danger to the nation, and it's personal with Trump. What the Trump White House is trying to do is turn this into a discussion of the character of the member of the resistance, which is politically smart, but in the end, he's absorbing body blow after body blow. The book, the convictions of Manafort and Cohn, this, at some point, this is going to weigh even with parts of the base, and he will not be able to sustain this constant sense of aggrieved attack as his only defense.
Dominic, people are going to like or dislike any president. But when they hear about chaos or dysfunction in a White House, and between the Woodward book and this op-ed, and it just seems like this is all confirming just how chaotic the White House is. What's your sense on how people grade that sort of chaos within a White House? Is that, regardless of where you are, there are some people who are going to applaud chaos because they want to throw a monkey wrench into Washington.
Right, but I really believe that we are firmly headed to uncharted territory in terms of what's going to happen. What's playing out publicly the last couple of days is only what I would say half to 75% of the country already knew anyway in terms of what's going on in the White House. And so I do agree with how many body blows is this president of the United States going to be able to take? And he can try and conveniently flip this into his classic, the media doesn't like me, blame the media. That's what he's trying to do now with the anonymous letter. But I don't see it working anymore.
Let's analyze the journalistic aspect of all this, and I'll start with you again on this, Dominic. First of all, is there any question in your mind that the Times sourced this accurately? This is somebody close to the president. This is not something made up. This is not something that's far afield. I mean, how much confidence do you have in the Times?
1,000%. Okay, let's break it down to you and I. Are we going to bet our entire career? Because if we're wrong, we know what's going to happen. The Times is going to dump us. Are we going to bet our entire career on nonsense? The Times, as we all know, knows the name of this individual. I don't see anything wrong with printing this.
Okay.
In terms of, we go with unnamed sources in journalism all the time.
I agree. There was one thing that I thought diminished the piece, and it's the word lodestar. I mean, it's a classic Washington trick where you use other people's language to throw them off the scent. People knew that Pence used that word. Whoever did it, if they're being noble, they threw in lodestar to try and frame it on Pence. And I thought that cheapened the source a little bit, but Times absolutely has a right to run it.
All of this discussion of should they run it, is it treason, do you put lie detector tests, it's when we discuss that, we defeat the purpose that this person wanted, which is to advance an understanding of how much danger the nation is in. I'm not against having these other discussions, but for crying out loud, sooner or later, someone's going to have to say, if that's true, what the hell do we do about it?
Well, and it seems like we're all on the same page about both the author and whether they were right to do it, and the Times and whether they were right to print it.
It's a risk, though. So if it turns out to be a hoax, and stranger things
define hoax.
Roger Stone.
You think Roger Stone wrote it, or maybe Trump wrote it himself?
Roger Stone is not an administration official.
To Dominic's point before, is when I saw the second thing I thought afterwards was uniforms on the street. You know, when an army starts to lose, you know, people drop their uniforms and they dress as civilians. it occurs to me that some people in the White House are beginning to cover their butts a little bit historically. And you see that with quotes that came out in the Woodward book that were on the record. And if people are starting to cover their tracks and say, when this went down and collapsed, I wasn't the bad guy. And that struck me a little bit. If that critical mass occurs, that's a real problem. What it means, I don't know, because he's not going to be impeached. The Senate's never going to vote 3/4 to
Final
impeach him.
question on this is, do you think we're going to find out who wrote it, and you want to take any guesses as to who it was?
I have no comment at this time. I was nowhere near
Brought to
Pittsburgh the night of the 27th. Eventually you'll find out.
We'll find out? You think we'll find out?
But here's my point, Andrew. I want us to think about this for a second. The name escapes me at the moment, but the FBI official
Mark Felt.
that was fired 2 days before his retirement. Fired.
Andy McCabe?
McCabe. Fired 2 days before his retirement. And you think somebody's going to come forward and go, oh, that's the noble idea. I was the one that wrote it. You already know what this president is going to do. He will ruin you financially, career-wise.
Fair enough.
So why would you come forward and admit when you're doing something that's patriotic for the country?
All right, we will take a break on that note. When we come back, the Kavanaugh hearings, they're not telling us that much about the nominee's positions. He's evading most of the probing questions from Democrats. But are we learning yet again about the shattering of D.C. norms and the hyper-partisan era we live in?